26. The angel went on through the village, finding it all wonderful enough. They begin, and just a little while, and then they end, he said to himself in a puzzled voice. But what are they doing meanwhile? Once he heard some invisible mouth chant inaudible words to the tune the man at the forge had hummed. "That's the poor creature the vicar shot with that great gun of his," said Sarah Glue, of one Church Cottages, peering over the blind. "He looks Frenchified," said Susan Hopper, peering through the interstices of that convenient veil on curiosity. "He has sweet eyes," said Sarah Glue, who had met them for a moment. The angel sauntered on. The postman passed him and touched his hat to him. Further down was a dog asleep in the sun. He went on and saw Mendham, who nodded distantly and hurried past. The curate did not care to be seen talking to an angel in the village until more was known about him. There came from one of the houses the sound of a child screaming in a passion. That brought a puzzled look to the angelic face. Then the angel reached the bridge below the last of the houses and stood leaning over the parapet, watching the glittering little cascade from the mill. "They begin, in just a little while," said the weir from the mill. The water raced under the bridge, green and dark, and streaked with foam. Beyond the mill rose the square tower of the church, with the churchyard behind it. A spray of tombstones and wooden headboards splashed up the hillside. A half-dozen of beech trees framed the picture. Then the angel heard a shuffling of feet and the gride of wheels behind him, and turning his head saw a man dressed in dirty brown rags and a felt hat grey with dust, who was standing with a slight swaying motion and fixedly regarding the angelic back. Beyond him was another, almost equally dirty, pushing a knife grinder's barrow over the bridge. "Mornin'," said the first person, smiling weakly. "Good morn." He arrested an escaping hiccup. The angel stared at him. He had never seen a really fatuous smile before. "Who are you?" said the angel. The fatuous smile faded. "Not your business who I am. Wish you good morn." "Come on," said the man with the grindstone, passing on his way. "Wish her good morn," said the dirty man, in a tone of extreme aggravation. "Can't you answer me?" "Come on, you fool," said the man with the grindstone, receding. "I don't understand," said the angel. "Don't understand, eh? Oh, simple enough. Wish her good morn. Will you answer me? Won't you? Come, wish her good morn. 'Cause some answer good morn. No, Gem? Ugh, have her teacher." The angel was puzzled. The drunken man stood swaying for a moment. Then he made an unsteady snatch at his hat and threw it down at the angel's feet. "Very well," he said, as one who decides great issues. "Come on," said the voice of the man with the grindstone, stopping perhaps 20 yards off. "You want to fight, you?" The angel failed to catch the word. "I'll show you. Not gonna answer Gem's good morning." He began to struggle with his jacket. "Think I'm drunk," he said. "I show you." The man with the grindstone sat down on the shaft to watch. "Come on," he said. The jacket was intricate, and the drunken man began to struggle about the road in his attempts to extricate himself, breathing threatenings and slaughter. Slowly, the angel began to suspect, remotely enough, that these demonstrations were hostile. "Merwin New Year when I done with yer," said the drunken man, coat almost over his head. At last, the garment lay on the ground, and through the frequent interstices of his reminiscences of a waistcoat, the drunken tinker displayed a fine, hairy, and muscular body to the angel's observant eyes. He squared up in masterly fashion. "Take the paint off yer," he remarked, advancing and receding, fists up and elbows out. "Come on," floated down the road. The angel's attention was concentrated on two huge, hairy black fists that swayed and advanced and retreated. "Come on, do you see? I'll show you," said the gentleman in rags. And then, with extraordinary ferocity, "My crikey, I'll show you." Suddenly, he lurched forward, and with a newborn instinct and raising a defensive arm as he did so, the angel stepped aside to avoid him. The fist missed the angelic shoulder by a hair's breadth, and the tinker collapsed in a heap with his face against the parapet of the bridge. The angel hesitated over the writhing, dusty heap of blasphemy for a moment, and then turned towards the man's companion up the road. "Let me get up," said the man on the bridge. "Let me get up, you swine. I'll show you." A strange disgust, a quivering repulsion came upon the angel. He walked slowly away from the drunkard towards the man with the grindstone. "What does it all mean?" said the angel. "I don't understand it." "Damn fool! Says it's his silver wedding," answered the man with the grindstone, evidently much annoyed. And then, in a tone of growing impatience, he called down the road once more. "Come on!" "Silver wedding," said the angel. "What is a silver wedding?" "Just his rot," said the man on the barrow. "But he's always having some excuse like that. Fair sickening it is. Last week it was his blooming birthday, and then he hadn't hardly got sober off a complimentary drunk to my new barrow. Oh, come on, you fool." "But I don't understand," said the angel. "Why does he sway about so? Why does he keep on trying to pick up his hat like that, and missing it?" "Why," said the tinker, "well, this is a blasted innocent country. Why, because he's blind. What else? Oh, come on, damn you. Because he's just as full as he can hold, that's why." The angel, noticing the tone of the second tinker's voice, judged it wiser not to question him further. But he stood by the grindstone and continued to watch the mysterious evolutions on the bridge. "Come on. Oh, I shall have to go and pick up that hat, I suppose. He's always at it. I never had such a blooming pard before. Always at it, he is." The man with the barrow meditated. "'Tain't as if he was a gentleman and hadn't no living to get. And he's such a reckless fool when he gets a bit on. Goes offering out everyone he meets. Well, there you go. I'm blessed if he didn't offer out a whole blooming Salvation Army. No judgment in it. Oh, come on, come on. Have to go and pick this blooming hat up now, I suppose. He don't care what trouble he gives." The angel watched the second tinker walk back, and, with affectionate blasphemy, assist the first to his hat and his coat. Then he turned, absolutely mystified, towards the village again. 27. After that incident, the angel walked along past the mill and round behind the church to examine the tombstones. "This seems to be the place where they put the broken pieces," said the angel, reading the inscriptions. "Curious word. Relict. Resurgam. They are not done with quite. What a huge pile it requires to keep her down. It is spirited of her." "Hawkins," said the angel, softly. "Hawkins. The name is strange to me. He did not die then. It is plain enough. Joined the angelic hosts May 17th, 1863. He must have felt as much out of place as I do down here. But I wonder why they put that little pot thing on the top of this monument. Curious. There are several others about, little stone pots with a rag of stiff stone drapery over them. And just then, the boys came pouring out of the National School, and first one and then several stopped to gape at the angel's crooked black figure among the white tombs. "Ain't he got back on him?" remarked one critic. "He's got her like a girl," said another. The angel turned towards them. He was struck by the queer little head sticking up over the lichenous wall. He smiled faintly at their staring faces, and then turned to marvel at the iron railings that enclosed the Fitzjarvis tomb. "Queer air of uncertainty," he said. "Slabs? Piles of stone? These railings? Are they afraid? Do these dead ever try and get up again? There's an air of repression, fortification." "Get your hair cut, get your hair cut," sang three little boys together. "Curious these human beings are," said the angel. "That man yesterday wanted to cut off my wings, and now these little creatures want me to cut off my hair. And the man on the bridge offered to take the paint off me. They will leave nothing of me soon." "Where did you get that at?" sang another little boy. "Where did you get them clothes?" "They ask questions that they evidently do not want answered," said the angel. "I can tell from the tone." He looked thoughtfully at the little boys. "I don't understand the methods of human intercourse. These are probably friendly advances, a kind of ritual. But I don't know the responses. I think I will go back to the little fat man in black, with the gold chain across his stomach, and ask him to explain. It is difficult." He turned towards the lich gate. "Oh!" said one of the little boys in a shrill falsetto, and threw a beechnut husk. It came bounding across the churchyard path. The angel stopped in surprise. This made all the little boys laugh. A second, imitating the first, said, "Oh!" and hit the angel. His astonishment was really delicious. They all began crying, "Oh!" and throwing beechnut husks. One hit the angel's hand, another stung him smartly by the ear. The angel made ungainly movements towards them. He spluttered some expostulation and made for the roadway. The little boys were amazed and shocked at his discomfiture and cowardice. Such sawney behaviour could not be encouraged. The pelting grew vigorously. You may perhaps be able to imagine those vivid moments. Daring small boys running in close and delivering shots. Milder small boys rushing round behind with flying discharges. Milton Screever's mongrel dog was roused to yelping ecstasy at the sight, and danced, full of wild imaginings, nearer and nearer to the angelic legs.
"Hi, hi," said a vigorous voice. "I never did. Where's Mr. Jarvis? Manners, manners, you young rascals."
The youngsters scattered right and left, some over the wall into the playground, some down the street.
"Frightful pest these boys are getting," said Crump, coming up. "I'm sorry they have been annoying you."
The angel seemed quite upset. "I don't understand," he said, "these human ways."
"Yes, of course. Unusual to you. How's your excrescence?"
"My what?" said the angel.
"Bifid limb, you know. How is it? Now you're down this way. Come in, and let me have a look at it again. You young roughs. And meanwhile these little louts of ours will be getting off home. They're all alike in these villages. Can't understand anything abnormal. See an odd-looking stranger, chuck a stone. No imagination beyond the parish. I'll give you physic if I catch you annoying strangers again. I suppose it's what one might expect. Come along, this way.
So the angel, horribly perplexed still, was hurried into the surgery to have his wound redressed. Lady Hammergallow's View. 28. In Siddermorton Park is Siddermorton House, where old Lady Hammergallow lives, chiefly upon Burgundy and the little scandals of the village. A dear old lady with a ropey neck, a ruddled countenance, and spasmodic gusts of odd temper, whose 3 remedies for all human trouble among her dependents are a bottle of gin, a pair of charity blankets, or a new crown piece. The house is 1.5 miles out of Siddermorton. Almost all the village is hers, saving a fringe to the south which belongs to Sir John Gotch, and she rules it with an autocratic rule, refreshing in these days of divided government. She orders and forbids marriages, drives objectionable people out of the village by the simple expedient of raising their rent, dismisses labourers, obliges heretics to go to church, and made Susan Dangett, who wanted to call her little girl Euphemia, have the infant christened Mary Ann. She is a sturdy, broad Protestant, and disapproves of the vicar's going bald like a tonsure. She is on the village council, which obsequiously trudges up the hill and over the moor to her, and, as she is a trifle deaf, speaks all its speeches into her speaking trumpet instead of a rostrum. She takes no interest now in politics, but until last year she was an active enemy of that Gladstone. She has parlourmaids instead of footmen to do her waiting, because of Hockley, the American stockbroker, and his 4 titans in plush. She exercises what is almost a fascination upon the village. If in the bar parlour of the Cat and Cornucopia you swear by God, no one would be shocked. But if you swore by Lady Hammergallow, they would probably be shocked enough to turn you out of the room. When she drives through Siddermorton, she always calls upon Bessie Flump, the postmistress, to hear all that has happened, and then upon Miss Finch, the dressmaker, to check back Bessie Flump. Sometimes she calls upon the vicar, sometimes upon Mrs. Mendham, whom she snubs, and even sometimes on Crump. Her sparkling pair of greys almost ran over the angel as he was walking down to the village. "So that's the genius," said Lady Hammergallow, and turned and looked at him through the gilt glasses on a stick that she always carried in her shrivelled and shaky hand. "A lunatic indeed. The poor creature has rather a pretty face. I'm sorry I missed him." But she went on to the vicarage nevertheless, and demanded news of it all. The conflicting accounts of Miss Flump, Miss Finch, Mrs. Mendham, Crump, and Mrs. Jehoram had puzzled her immensely. The vicar, hard-pressed, did all he could to say into her speaking trumpet what had really happened. He toned down the wings and the saffron robe, but he felt the case was hopeless. He spoke of his protégé as Mr. Angel. He addressed pathetic asides to the kingfisher. The old lady noticed his confusion. Her queer old head went jerking backwards and forwards, and now the speaking trumpet in his face when he had nothing to say, then the shrunken eyes peering at him, oblivious of the explanation that was coming from his lips. A great many ohs and ahs. She caught some fragments, certainly. "You have asked him to stop with you, indefinitely," said Lady Hammergallow, with a great idea taking shape rapidly in her mind. "I did, perhaps inadvertently, make such, and you don't know where he comes from?" "Not at all." "Nor who his father is, I suppose?" said Lady Hammergallow mysteriously.
No, said the vicar. Now, said Lady Hammergallow archly, and keeping her glasses to her eye, she suddenly dug at his ribs with her trumpet. My dear Lady Hammergallow, I thought so. Don't think I would blame you, Mr. Hillier. She gave a corrupt laugh that she delighted in. The world is the world, and men are men, and the poor boy is a cripple, eh? A kind of judgment in mourning, I noticed. It reminds me of the Scarlet Letter. The mother's dead, I suppose. It's just as well. Really, I'm not a narrow woman. I respect you for having him, really, I do. But, Lady Hammergallow, don't spoil everything by denying it. It is so very, very plain to a woman of the world. Oh, that Mrs. Mendham. She amuses me with her suspicions, such odd ideas in a curate's wife. But I hope it didn't happen when you were in orders. Lady Hammergallow, I protest, upon my word. Mr. Hillier, I protest. No. Not anything you can say will alter my opinion one jot. Don't try. I never suspected you were nearly such an interesting man. But this suspicion is unendurable. We will help him together, Mr. Hillier. You may rely upon me. It is most romantic. She beamed benevolence. But, Lady Hammergallow, I must speak. She gripped her ear trumpet resolutely and held it before her and shook her head. He has quite a genius for music, Vicar, so I hear. I can assure you most solemnly I thought so. And being a cripple, you are under a most cruel. I thought that if his gift is really what that Jehoram woman says, an unjustifiable suspicion that ever a man— I don't think much of her judgment, of course. Consider my position. Have I gained no character? It might be possible to do something for him as a performer. Have I— Bother, it's no good. And so, dear Vicar, I propose to give him an opportunity of showing us what he can do. I have been thinking it all over as I drove here. On Tuesday next, I will invite just a few people of taste, and he shall bring his violin, eh? And if that goes well, I will see if I can get some introductions and really push him. But, Lady Hammergallow, not another word, said Lady Hammergallow, still resolutely holding her speaking trumpet before her and clutching her eyeglasses. I really must not leave those horses. Cutler is so annoyed if I keep them too long. He finds waiting tedious, poor man, unless there is a public house near. She made for the door. Damn, said the vicar under his breath. He had never used the word since he had taken orders. It shows you how an angel's visit may disorganize a man. He stood under the veranda, watching the carriage drive away. The world seemed coming to pieces about him. Had he lived a virtuous celibate life for 30-odd years in vain? The things of which these people thought him capable. He stood and stared at the green cornfield opposite and down at the straggling village. It seemed real enough, and yet for the first time in his life there was a queer doubt of its reality. He rubbed his chin, then turned and went slowly upstairs to his dressing room and sat for a long time staring at a garment of some yellow texture. "Know his father," he said. And he is immortal, and was fluttering about his heaven when my ancestors were marsupials. I wish he was there now."
He got up and began to feel the robe.
"I wonder how they get such things," said the vicar.
Then he went and stared out of the window.
"I suppose everything is wonderful, even the rising and setting of the sun. I suppose there is no adamantine ground for any belief, but one gets into a regular way of taking things. This disturbs it. I seem to be waking up to the invisible. It is the strangest of uncertainties. I have not felt so stirred and unsettled since my adolescence."
Further Adventures of the Angel in the Village. 29.
"That's all right," said Crump when the bandaging was replaced. "It's a trick of memory, no doubt, but these excrescences of yours don't seem nearly so large as they did yesterday. I suppose they struck me rather forcibly. Stop and have lunch with me now you're down here. Midday meal, you know. The youngsters will be swallowed up by school again in the afternoon."
"I never saw anything heal so well in my life," he said, as they walked into the dining room.
"Your blood and flesh must be as clean and free from bacteria as they make 'em. Whatever stuff there is in your head," he added, sotto voce.
At lunch, he watched the angel narrowly and talked to draw him out.
"Journey tire you yesterday?" he said suddenly.
"Journey?" said the angel. "Oh, my wings felt a little stiff."
"Not to be had," said Crump to himself. "Suppose I must enter into it. So you flew all the way, eh? No conveyance?"
"There wasn't any way," explained the angel, taking mustard. "I was flying up a symphony with some griffins and fiery cherubim, and suddenly everything went dark, and I was in this world of yours."
"Dear me," said Crump. "And that's why you haven't any luggage."
He drew his serviette across his mouth, and a smile flickered in his eyes.
"I suppose you know this world of ours pretty well, watching us over the adamantine walls and all that kind of thing, eh?"
"Not very well. We dream of it sometimes, in the moonlight, when the nightmares have fanned us to sleep with their wings."
"Ah, yes, of course," said Crump. "Very poetical way of putting it. Won't you take some burgundy? It's just beside you. There's a persuasion in this world, you know, that angels' visits are by no means infrequent. Perhaps some of your friends have travelled. They are supposed to come down to deserving persons in prisons, and do refined notches and that kind of thing. Faust business, you know."
"I've never heard of anything of the kind," said the angel.
"Only the other day, a lady whose baby was my patient for the time being, indigestion, assured me that certain facial contortions the little creature made indicated that it was dreaming of angels. In the novels of Mrs. Henry Wood, that is spoken of as an infallible symptom of an early departure. I suppose you can't throw any light on that obscure pathological manifestation?"
"I don't understand it at all," said the angel, puzzled, and not clearly apprehending the doctor's drift.
"Getting huffy," said Crump to himself. "Sees I'm poking fun at him. There's one thing I'm curious about. Do the new arrivals complain much about their medical attendants? I've always fancied there must be a good deal of hydropathic talk just at first. I was looking at that picture in the academy only this June."
"New arrivals?" said the angel. "I really don't follow you."
The doctor stared. "Don't they come?"
"Come? said the angel. Who?
The people who die here.
After they've gone to pieces here.
That's the general belief, you know.
People like the woman who screamed out of the door, and the black-faced man, and his volutations, and the horrible little things that threw husks. Oh, certainly not. I never saw such creatures before I fell into this world.
Oh, but come, said the doctor. You'll tell me next your official robes are not white, and that you can't play the harp.
There's no such thing as white in the angelic land, said the angel. It's that queer blank colour you get by mixing up all the others.
Why, my dear sir,
said the doctor, suddenly altering his tone.
You positively know nothing about the land you come from. White's the very essence of it.
The angel stared at him. Was the man jesting? He looked perfectly serious.
Look here, said
Crump, and getting up he went to the sideboard on which a copy of the parish magazine was lying. He brought it round to the angel and opened it at the coloured supplement.
Here's some real angels, he said. You see, it's not simply the wings make the angel. White, you see, with a curly wisp of robe, sailing up into the sky with their wings furled. Those are angels on the best authority. Hydroxyle kind of hair. One has a bit of a harp, you see, and the other is helping this wingless lady. Kind of larval angel, you know, upward.
Oh, but really, said the angel. Those are not angels at all.
But they are, said
Crump, putting the magazine back on the sideboard and resuming his seat with an air of intense satisfaction.
I can assure you, I have the best authority.
I can assure you. Crump tucked in the corners of his mouth and shook his head from side to side, even as he had done to the vicar.
No good, he said. We can't alter our ideas just because an irresponsible visitor...
If these are angels, said the angel, then I have never been in the angelic land.
Precisely, said Crump,
ineffably self-satisfied.
That was just what I was getting at.
The angel stared at him for a minute, round-eyed, and then was seized for the second time by the human disorder of laughter.
said Crump, joining in. I thought you were not quite so mad as you seemed.
And for the rest of the lunch, they were both very merry, for entirely different reasons, and Crump insisted upon treating the angel as a dog of the highest degree. 30. After the angel had left Crump's house, he went up the hill again towards the vicarage. But, possibly moved by the desire to avoid Mrs. Gustick, he turned aside at the stile and made a detour by the Lark's Field and Bradley's farm. He came upon the respectable tramp slumbering peacefully among the wild flowers. He stopped to look, struck by the celestial tranquillity of that individual's face. And even as he did so, the respectable tramp awoke with a start and sat up. He was a pallid creature, dressed in rusty black, with a broken-spirited crush hat cocked over one eye.
"Good afternoon," he said, affably. "How are you?"
"Very well, thank you," said the angel, who had mastered the phrase. The respectable tramp eyed the angel critically.
"Padding the hoof, matey," he said. "Like me?"
The angel was puzzled by him. "Why," asked the angel, "do you sleep like this instead of sleeping up in the air, on a bed?"
"Well, I'm blowed," said the respectable tramp. "Why don't I sleep in a bed? Well, it's like this. Sandringham's got the painters in, there's the drains up in Windsor Castle, and I haven't no other house to go to. You haven't the price of half a pint in your pocket, have you?"
"I have nothing in my pocket," said the angel.
Is this here village called Sidder Morton? Said the tramp, rising creakily to his feet and pointing to the clustering roofs down the hill.
Yes, said the angel. They call it Sidder Morton.
I know it, said the tramp. And a very pretty little village it is, too.
He stretched and yawned and stood regarding the place.
Houses, he said reflectively. Produce, waving his hand at the cornfields and orchards. Looks cosy, don't it?
It has a quaint beauty of its own, said the angel.
It has a quaint beauty of its own. Yes. Lord, I'd like to sack the bloomin' place. I was born there.
Dear me, said the angel.
Yes, I was born there. Ever heard of a pithed frog?
Pithed frog, said the angel. No.
It's a thing these here vivisectionists do. They takes a frog and they cuts out his brains and they shoves a bit of pith in the place of 'em. That's a pithed frog. Well, that there village is full of pithed human beings.
The angel took it quite seriously. Is that so? He said.
That's so. You take my word for it. Every one of 'em has had their brains cut out and chunks of rotten touchwood put in the place of it. And you see that little red place there?
That's called the National School, said the angel.
Yes, that's where they piths 'em, said the tramp,
quite in love with his conceit. Really?
Well, that's very interesting. It stands to reason, said the tramp. If they had brains, they'd have ideas. And if they had ideas, they'd think for themselves. And you can go through that village from end to end and never meet anybody doing as much. Pithed human beings they are. I know that village. I was born there. And I might be there now, a-toiling for my betters, if I hadn't struck against the pithin'.
Is it a painful operation? Asked the angel.
In parts, although it ain't the heads gets hurt, and it lasts a long time. They take 'em young into that school, and they says to them, "Come in here and we'll improve your minds," they says. And in the little kiddies go as good as gold, and they begin shoving it into them, bit by bit and hard and dry, shoving out the nice juicy brains, dates and lists and things. Out they comes, no brains in their heads, and wound up nice and tight, ready to touch their hats to anyone who looks at them. Why, one touched his hat to me yesterday. And they runs about spry and does all the dirty work, and feels thankful they're allowed to live. They take a positive pride in hard work for its own sake. After they've been pithed. See that chap ploughing?
Yes, said the angel. Is he pithed?
Rather, else he'd be padding the hoof this pleasant weather, like me and the blessed apostles.
I begin to understand, said the angel, rather dubiously.
I knew you would, said the philosophical tramp. I thought you was the right sort. But speaking serious, ain't it ridiculous? Centuries and centuries of civilization, and look at that poor swine there, sweating himself empty and trudging up that hillside. He's English, he is. He belongs to the top race in creation, he does. He's one of the rulers of India. It's enough to make a nigger laugh. The flag that's braved 1,000 years, the battle and the breeze. That's his flag. There never was a country who was as great and glorious as this. Never. And that's what it makes of us. I'll tell you a little story about them parts, as you seems to be a bit of a stranger. There's a chap called Gotch. Sir John Gotch, they calls him. And when he was a young gent from Oxford, I was a little chap of 8, and my sister was a girl of 17. Their servant she was. But Lord, everybody's heard that story. It's common enough of him or the likes of him.
I haven't, said the angel.
All that's pretty and lively of the gals they chucks into the gutters, and all the men with a pen'orth of spunk or adventure, all who won't drink what the curate's wife sends 'em instead of beer, and touch their hats promiscuous, and leave the rabbits and birds alone for their betters, gets drove out of the villages as rough characters. Patriotism. Talk about improving the race. What's left ain't fit to look a nigger in the face. A Chinaman would be ashamed of 'em.
But I don't understand, said the angel. I don't follow you. At that, the philosophic tramp became more explicit, and told the angel the simple story of Sir John Gotch and the kitchen maid. It's scarcely necessary to repeat it. You may understand that it left the angel puzzled. It was full of words he did not understand, for the only vehicle of emotion the tramp possessed was blasphemy. Yet, though their tongues differed so, he could still convey to the angel some of his own, probably unfounded, persuasion of the injustice and cruelty of life, and of the utter detestableness of Sir John Gotch. The last the angel saw of him was his dusty black back receding down the lane towards Ipping Hanger. A pheasant appeared by the roadside, and the philosophical tramp immediately caught up a stone and sent the bird clucking with a viciously accurate shot. Then he disappeared round the corner. Mrs. Jehoram's Breadth of View. 31. I heard someone playing the fiddle in the vicarage as I came by, said Mrs. Jehoram, taking her cup of tea from Mrs. Mendham. The vicar plays, said Mrs. Mendham. I have spoken to George about it, but it's no good. I do not think a vicar should be allowed to do such things. It's so foreign. But there I know, dear, said Mrs. Jehoram. But I heard the vicar once at the schoolroom. I don't think this was the vicar. It was quite clever, some of it, quite smart, and new. I was telling dear Lady Hammergallow this morning. I fancy the lunatic, very likely. These half-witted people. My dear, I don't think I shall ever forget that dreadful encounter. Yesterday. Nor I. My poor girls. They are too shocked to say a word about it. I was telling dear Lady Hammer, quite proper of them. It was dreadful, dear, for them. And now, dear, I want you to tell me frankly, do you really believe that creature was a man? You should have heard the violin. I still more than half suspect, Jessie. Mrs. Mendham leant forward as if to whisper. Mrs. Jehoram helped herself to cake. I'm sure no woman could play the violin quite like I heard it played this morning. Of course, if you say so, that settles the matter, said Mrs. Mendham. Mrs. Jehoram was the autocratic authority in Siddermorton upon all questions of art, music, and belles lettres. Her late husband had been a minor poet. Then Mrs. Mendham added a judicial, still. Do you know, said Mrs. Jehoram, I'm half inclined to believe the dear vicar's story. How good of you, Jessie, said Mrs. Mendham. But really, I don't think he could have had anyone in the vicarage before that afternoon. I feel sure we should have heard of it. I don't see how a strange cat could come within 4 miles of Siddermorton without the report coming round to us. The people here gossip so. I always distrust the vicar, said Mrs. Mendham. I know him. Yes, but the story is plausible. If this Mr. Angel were someone very clever and eccentric, he would have to be very eccentric to dress as he did. There are degrees and limits, dear. But kilts, said Mrs. Jehoram, are all very well in the Highlands. Mrs. Jehoram's eyes had rested upon a black speck creeping slowly across a patch of yellowish green up the hill. "There he goes," said Mrs. Jehoram, rising. "Across the cornfield. I'm sure that's him. I can see the ump. Unless it's a man with a sack. Oh, bless me, Minnie, here's an opera glass. How convenient for peeping at the vicarage. Yes, it's the man. He is a man, with such a sweet face." Very unselfishly, she allowed her hostess to share the opera glass. For a minute there was a rustling silence. "His dress," said Mrs. Mendham, "is quite respectable now." "Quite," said Mrs. Jehoram. A pause. "He looks cross, and his coat is dusty." "He walks steadily enough," said Mrs. Mendham. "Or one might think, this hot weather." Another pause. "You see, dear," said Mrs. Jehoram, putting down the lorgnette, "what I was going to say was that possibly he might be a genius in disguise. If you can call next door to nothing a disguise. No doubt it was eccentric, but I've seen children in little blouses not at all unlike him. So many clever people are peculiar in their dress and manners. A genius may steal a horse where a bank clerk may not look over the hedge. Very possibly he's quite well known and laughing at our Arcadian simplicity. And really it wasn't so improper as some of these new women bicycling costumes. I saw one in one of the illustrated papers only a few days ago. The New Budget, I think. Quite tight, you know, dear. No, I cling to the genius theory, especially after the playing. I'm sure the creature is original, perhaps very amusing. In fact, I intend to ask the vicar to introduce me." "My dear!" cried Mrs. Mendham. "I'm resolute," said Mrs. Jehoram. "I'm afraid you're rash," said Mrs. Mendham. "Geniuses and people of that kind are all very well in London, but here, at the vicarage, we are going to educate the folks. Oh, I love originality. At any rate, I mean to see him." "Take care you don't see too much of him," said Mrs. Mendham. "I've heard the fashion is quite changing. I understand that some of the very best people have decided that genius is not to be encouraged any more. These recent scandals, only in literature, I can assure you, dear. In music—" "Nothing you can say, my dear," said Mrs. Mendham, going off at a tangent, "will convince me that that person's costume was not extremely suggestive and improper." A trivial incident. 32. The angel came thoughtfully by the hedge, across the field, towards the vicarage. The rays of the setting sun shone on his shoulders and touched the vicarage with gold, and blazed like fire in all the windows. By the gate, bathed in the sunlight, stood little Delia, the waiting maid. She stood watching him under her hand. It suddenly came into the angel's mind that she, at least, was beautiful. And not only beautiful, but alive and warm. She opened the gate for him and stood aside. She was sorry for him, for her elder sister was a cripple. He bowed to her, as he would have done to any woman, and for just one moment looked into her face. She looked back at him, and something leapt within her. The angel made an irresolute movement. "Your eyes are very beautiful," he said quietly, with a remote wonder in his voice. "Oh, sir," she said, starting back. The angel's expression changed to perplexity. He went on up the pathway between the vicar's flower beds, and she stood with the gate held open in her hand, staring after him. Just under the rose-twinned veranda, He turned and looked at her. She still stared at him for a moment, and then, with a queer gesture, turned round with her back to him, shutting the gate as she did so, and seemed to be looking down the valley towards the church tower. The warp and the woof of things. 33. At the dinner table, the angel told the vicar the more striking of his day's adventures. "The strange thing," said the angel, "is the readiness of you human beings, the zest with which you inflict pain. Those boys pelting me this morning—"
"Seemed to enjoy it," said the vicar. "I know."
"Yet they don't like pain," said the angel.
"No," said the vicar. "They don't like it."
"Then," said the angel, "I saw some beautiful plants rising with a spike of leaves, two this way and two that, and when I caressed one it caused the most uncomfortable—"
"Stinging nettle,"
said the vicar. "At any rate, a new sort of pain, and another plant with a head like a coronet and richly decorated leaves, spiked and jagged."
"A thistle, probably."
"And in your garden, the beautiful, sweet-smelling plant—"
"The Sweet Briar," said the vicar. "I remember."
"And that pink flower that sprang out of the box—"
"Out of the box?" said the vicar.
"Last night," said the angel, "that went climbing up the curtains. Flame."
"Oh, the matches and the candles, yes," said the vicar.
"Then the animals. A dog today behaved most disagreeably. And these boys, and the way in which people speak. Everyone seems anxious, willing, at any rate, to give this pain. Everyone seems busy giving pain."
"Or avoiding it," said the vicar, pushing his dinner away before him. "Yes, of course. It's fighting everywhere. The whole living world is a battlefield, the whole world. We are driven by pain here. How it lies on the surface. This angel sees it in a day."
"But why does everyone, everything, want to give pain?" asked the angel.
"Is it not so in the angelic land?" said the vicar.
"No," said the angel. "Why is it so here?" The vicar wiped his lips with his napkin, slowly.
"It is so," he said. "Pain," said he, still more slowly, "is the warp and the woof of this life. Do you know," he said, after a pause, "it is almost impossible for me to imagine a world without pain. And yet, as you played this morning. But this world is different. It is the very reverse of an angelic world. Indeed, a number of people, excellent religious people, have been so impressed by the universality of pain that they think, after death, things will be even worse for a great many of us. It seems to me an excessive view, but it's a deep question, almost beyond one's power of discussion."
And, incontinently, the vicar plumped into an impromptu dissertation upon necessity, how things were so because they were so, how one had to do this and that.
"Even our food," said the vicar.
"What?" said the angel.
"Is not obtained without inflicting pain," said the vicar.
The angel's face went so white that the vicar checked himself suddenly, or he was just on the very verge of a concise explanation of the antecedents of a leg of lamb. There was a pause. "By the by," said the angel suddenly, "have you been pithed, like the common people?" The Angel's Debut. 34. When Lady Hammergallow made up her mind, things happened as she resolved. And though the vicar made a spasmodic protest, she carried out her purpose and got audience, angel, and violin together at Siddermorton House before the week was out.
"A genius the vicar has discovered,"
she said, so with eminent foresight putting any possibility of blame for a failure on the vicar's shoulders.
"The dear vicar tells me,"
she would say, and proceed to marvellous anecdotes of the angel's cleverness with his instrument. But she was quite in love with her idea. She had always had a secret desire to play the patroness to obscure talent. Hitherto it had not turned out to be talent when it came to the test.
"It would be such a good thing for him," she said. "His hair is long already, and with that high colour he would be beautiful, simply beautiful on a platform. The vicar's clothes fitting him so badly makes him look quite like a fashionable pianist already. And the scandal of his birth, not told, of course, but whispered, would be quite an inducement, when he gets to London, that is."
The vicar had the most horrible sensations as the day approached. He spent hours trying to explain the situation to the angel, other hours trying to imagine what people would think, still worse hours trying to anticipate the angel's behaviour. Hitherto the angel had always played for his own satisfaction. The vicar would startle him every now and then by rushing upon him with some new point of etiquette that had just occurred to him. As for instance,
"It's very important where you put your hat, you know. Don't put it on a chair, whatever you do. Hold it until you get your tea, you know. And then, let me see, then put it down somewhere, you know."
The journey to Siddermorton House was accomplished without misadventure, but at the moment of introduction the vicar had a spasm of horrible misgivings. He had forgotten to explain introductions. The angel's naive amusement was evident, but nothing very terrible happened.
"Rummy-looking greaser,"
said Mr. Rathbone Slater, who devoted considerable attention to costume.
"Wants grooming. No manners. Grinned when he saw me shaking hands. Did it chic enough, I thought."
One trivial misadventure occurred. When Lady Hammergallow welcomed the angel, she looked at him through her glasses. The apparent size of her eyes startled him. His surprise and his quick attempt to peer over the brims was only too evident, but the vicar had warned him of the ear trumpet. The angel's incapacity to sit on anything but a music stool appeared to excite some interest among the ladies, but led to no remarks. They regarded it perhaps as the affectation of a budding professional. He was remiss with the teacups and scattered the crumbs of his cake abroad. You must remember he was quite an amateur at eating. He crossed his legs. He fumbled over the hat business after vainly trying to catch the vicar's eye. The eldest, Miss Papava, tried to talk to him about continental watering places and cigarettes, and formed a low opinion of his intelligence. The angel was surprised by the production of an easel and several books of music, and a little unnerved at first by the sight of Lady Hammergallow, sitting with her head on one side, watching him with those magnified eyes through her gilt glasses. Mrs. Jehoram came up to him before he began to play, and asked him the name of the charming piece he was playing the other afternoon. The angel said it had no name, and Mrs. Jehoram thought music ought never to have any names, and wanted to know who it was by. And when the angel told her he played it out of his head, she said he must be quite a genius, and looked open and indisputably fascinating admiration at him. The curate from Ipping Hanger, who was professionally a Celt and who played the piano and talked colour and music with an air of racial superiority, watched him jealously. The vicar, who was presently captured and set down next to Lady Hammergallow, kept an anxious eye ever angelward, while she told him particulars of the incomes made by violinists, particulars which, for the most part, she invented as she went along. She had been a little ruffled by the incident of the glasses, but had decided that it came within the limits of permissible originality. So, figure to yourself the Green Saloon at Siddermorton Park. An angel, thinly disguised in clerical vestments, and with a violin in his hands, standing by the grand piano, and a respectable gathering of quite nice people, nicely dressed, grouped about the room. Anticipatory gabble. One hears scattered fragments of conversation. "He is incog," said the very eldest Miss Papaver to Mrs. Pirbright. "Isn't it quaint and delicious? Jessica Jehoram says she saw him at Vienna, but she can't remember the name. The vicar knows all about him, but he is so close."
"How hot and uncomfortable the dear vicar is looking," said Mrs. Pirbright. "I've noticed it before when he sits next to Lady Hammergallow. She simply will not respect his cloth. She goes on."
"His tie is all askew," said the very eldest Miss Papaver. "And his hair. It really hardly looks as though he had brushed it all day."
"Seems a foreign sort of chap. Affected. All very well in a drawing-room," said George Haringey, sitting apart with the younger Miss Pirbright. "But for my part, give me a masculine man and a feminine woman. What do you think?"
"Oh, I think so too," said the younger Miss Pirbright.
"Guineas and guineas," said Lady Hammergallow. "I've heard that some of them keep quite stylish establishments. You would scarcely credit it."
"I love music, Mr. Angel. I adore it. It stirs something in me. I can scarcely describe it," said Mrs. Jehoram. "Who is it that says that delicious antithesis? Life without music is brutality. Music without life is... Oh dear me, perhaps you remember. Music without life, it's Ruskin, I think." "I'm sorry that I do not know," said the angel. "I have read very few books." "How charming of you," said Mrs. Jehoram. "I wish I didn't. I sympathise with you profoundly. I would do the same, only we poor women. I suppose it's originality we lack, and down here one is driven to the most desperate proceedings."
"He's certainly very pretty, but the ultimate test of a man is his strength," said George Haringey. "What do you think?"
"Oh, I think so too," said the younger Miss Pirbright.
"It's the effeminate man who makes the masculine woman. When the glory of a man is his hair, what's a woman to do? And when men go running about with beautiful hectic dabs—"
"Oh, George, you are so dreadfully satirical today," said the younger Miss Pirbright. "I'm sure it isn't paint."
"I'm really not his guardian, my dear Lady Hammergallow. Of course, it's very kind indeed of you to take such an interest."
"Are you really going to improvise?" said Mrs. Jehoram, in a state of cooing delight.
"Shh,"
said the curate from Ipping-Hanger. Then the angel began to play, looking straight before him as he did so, thinking of the wonderful things of the angelic land, and yet insensibly letting the sadness he was beginning to feel steal over the fantasia he was playing. When he forgot his company, the music was strange and sweet. When the sense of his surroundings floated into his mind, the music grew capricious and grotesque. But so great was the hold of the angelic music upon the vicar that his anxieties fell from him at once, so soon as the angel began to play. Mrs. Jehoram sat and looked rapt and sympathetic as hard as she could, though the music was puzzling at times, and tried to catch the angel's eye. He really had a wonderfully mobile face, and the tenderest shades of expression, and Mrs. Jehoram was a judge. George Haringey looked bored, until the younger Miss Pirbright, who adored him, put out her mousy little shoe to touch his manly boot, and then he turned his face to catch the feminine delicacy of her coquettish eye, and was comforted. The very eldest Miss Papaver and Mrs. Pirbright sat quite still, and looked churchy for nearly 4 minutes. Then said the eldest Miss Papaver in a whisper, "I always enjoy violin music so much." And Mrs. Pirbright answered, "We get so little nice music down here." And Miss Papaver said, "He plays very nicely." And Mrs. Pirbright, "Such a delicate tooth." And Miss Papaver, "Does Willie keep up his lessons?" And so to a whispered conversation. The curate from Iping-Hanger sat, he felt, in full view of the company. He had one hand curled round his ear, and his eyes hard and staring fixedly at the pedestal of the Hammergallows Havre vase. He supplied, by the movements of his mouth, a kind of critical guide to any of the company who were disposed to avail themselves of it. It was a generous way he had. His aspect was severely judicial, tempered by starts of evident disapproval and guarded appreciation. The vicar leaned back in his chair and stared at the angel's face, and was presently wrapped away in a wonderful dream. Lady Hammergallow, with quick, jerky movements of the head and a low but insistent rustling, surveyed and tried to judge of the effect of the angelic playing. Mr. Rathbone Slater stared very solemnly into his hat and looked very miserable, and Mrs. Rathbone Slater made mental memoranda of Mrs. Jehoram's sleeves, and the air about them all was heavy with exquisite music, for all that had ears to hear. "Scarcely affected enough," whispered Lady Hammergallow hoarsely, suddenly poking the vicar in the ribs. The vicar came out of dreamland suddenly. "Nay," shouted the vicar, startled, coming up with a jump. "Shush!" said the curate from Iping-Hanger, and everyone looked shocked at the brutal insensibility of Hillier. "So unusual of the vicar," said the very eldest Miss Papaver, "to do things like that." The angel went on playing. The curate from Iping-Hanger began making mesmeric movements with his index finger, and as the thing proceeded, Mr. Rathbone Slater got amazingly limp. He solemnly turned his hat round and altered his view. The vicar lapsed from an uneasy discomfort into dreamland again. Lady Hammergallow rustled a great deal, and presently found a way of making her chair creak. And at last the thing came to an end. Lady Hammergallow exclaimed, "Delicious!" though she had never heard a note, and began clapping her hands. At that, everyone clapped, except Mr. Rathbone Slater, who rapped his hat brim instead. The curate from Iping-Hanger clapped with a judicial air. "So I said," clap, clap, clap. "If you cannot cook food my way," clap, 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 "you must go," said Mrs. Pirbright, clapping vigorously. "This music is a delightful treat." "It is. I always revel in music," said the very eldest Miss Papaver. "And did she improve after that?" "Not a bit of it," said Mrs. Pirbright. The vicar woke up again and stared round the saloon. Did other people see these visions, or were they confined to him alone? Surely they must all see, and have a wonderful command of their feelings. It was incredible that such music should not affect them. "He's a trifle gauche," said Lady Hammergallow, jumping upon the vicar's attention. "He neither bows nor smiles. He must cultivate oddities like that. Every successful executant is more or less gauche." "Did you really make that up yourself?" said Mrs. Jehoram, sparkling her eyes at him. "As he went along? Really, it is wonderful. Nothing less than wonderful."
"A little amateurish," said the curate from Iping-Hanger to Mr. Rathbone Slater. "A great gift, undoubtedly, but a certain lack of sustained training. There were one or two little things. I would like to talk to him." "His trousers look like concertinas," said Mr. Rathbone Slater. "He ought to be told that. It's scarcely decent." "Can you do imitations, Mr. Angel?" said Lady Hammergallow.
"Oh, do some imitations," said Mrs. Jehoram. "I adore imitations."
"It was a fantastic thing," said the curate of Ipping-Hanger to the vicar of Siddermorton, waving his long, indisputably musical hands as he spoke. "A little involved, to my mind. I've heard it before somewhere, I forget where. He has a genius, undoubtedly, but occasionally he is loose. There is certain deadly precision wanting. There are years of discipline yet." "I don't admire these complicated pieces of music," said George Haringey. "I have simple tastes, I'm afraid. There seems to me no tune in it. There's nothing I like so much as simple music. Tune, simplicity, is the need of the age, in my opinion. We are so over-subtle. Everything is far-fetched. Homegrown thoughts and home sweet home for me. What do you think?"
"Oh, I think so, quite," said the younger Miss Pirbright.
"Well, Amy, chattering to George as usual?" said Mrs. Pirbright across the room.
"As usual, Ma," said the younger Miss Pirbright, glancing round with a bright smile at Miss Papaver, and turning again so as not to lose the next utterance from George.
"I wonder if you and Mr. Angel could manage a duet," said Lady Hammergallow to the curate from Ipping-Hanger, who was looking preternaturally gloomy. "I'm sure I should be delighted," said the curate from Ipping-Hanger, brightening up.
"Duets," said the angel. "The two of us. Then he can play. I understood. The vicar told me."
"Mr. Wilmerdings is an accomplished pianist," interrupted the vicar.
"But the imitations,"
said Mrs. Jehoram, who detested Wilmerdings.
"Imitations?" said the angel.
"A pig squeaking, a cock crowing, you know," said Mr. Rathbone Slater, and added, lower, "Best fun you can get out of a fiddle, my opinion."
"I really don't understand," said the angel. "A pig crowing?" "You don't like imitations?" said Mrs. Jehoram.
"Nor do I, really. I accept the snub. I think they degrade. Perhaps afterwards Mr. Angel will relent," said Lady Hammergallow, when Mrs. Pirbright had explained the matter to her. She could scarcely credit her ear-trumpet. When she asked for imitations, she was accustomed to get imitations. Mr. Wilmerdings had seated himself at the piano and had turned to a familiar pile of music in the recess. "What do you think of that barcarolle thing of Spores?" he said over his shoulder. "I suppose you know it?" The angel looked bewildered. He opened the folio before the angel.
"What an odd kind of book," said the angel. "What do all those crazy dots mean?"
At that, the vicar's blood ran cold. "What dots?" said the curate.
"There," said the angel, with incriminating finger.
"Oh, come," said the curate.
There was one of those swift, short silences that mean so much in a social gathering. Then the eldest Miss Papaver turned upon the vicar. "Does not Mr. Angel play from ordinary music, from the ordinary notation?"
"I have never heard," said the vicar, getting red now after the first shock of horror. "I have really never seen—"
The angel felt the situation was strained, though what was straining it he could not understand. He became aware of a doubtful and unfriendly look upon the faces that regarded him. "Impossible," he heard Mrs. Pirbright say. "After that beautiful music." The eldest Miss Papaver went to Lady Hammergallow at once, and began to explain into her ear-trumpet that Mr. Angel did not wish to play with Mr. Wilmerdings, and alleged an ignorance of written music.
"He cannot play from notes," said Lady Hammergallow, in a voice of measured horror.
"Nonsense!" "Notes?" said the angel, perplexed. "Are these notes?"
"It's carrying the joke too far, simply because he doesn't want to play with Wilmerdings," said Mr. Rathbone Slater to George Haringey. There was an expectant pause. The angel perceived he had to be ashamed of himself. He was ashamed of himself.
"Then,"
said Lady Hammergallow, throwing her head back and speaking with deliberate indignation as she rustled forward,
"if you cannot play with Mr. Wilmerdings, I am afraid I cannot ask you to play again."
She made it sound like an ultimatum. Her glasses in her hand quivered violently with indignation. The angel was now human enough to appreciate the fact that he was crushed.
"What is it?" said little Lady Rushduck in the further bay. "He's refused to play with old Wilmerdings," said Tommy Rathbone Slater. "What a lark! The old girl's purple. She thinks heaps of that ass Wilmerdings." "Perhaps, Mr. Wilmerdings, you will favour us with that delicious polonaise of Chopin's," said Lady Hammergallow.
Everybody else was hushed. The indignation of Lady Hammergallow inspired much the same silence as a coming earthquake or an eclipse. Mr. Wilmerdings perceived he would be doing a real social service to begin at once, and, be it entered to his credit now that his account draws near its settlement, he did. "If a man pretend to practise an art," said George Haringey, "he ought at least to have the conscience to study the elements of it. What do you?"
"Oh, I think so too,"
said the younger Miss Pirbright. The vicar felt that the heavens had fallen. He sat crumpled up in his chair, a shattered man. Lady Hammergallow sat down next to him without appearing to see him. She was breathing heavily, but her face was terribly calm. Everyone sat down. Was the angel grossly ignorant or only grossly impertinent? The angel was vaguely aware of some frightful offence, aware that in some mysterious way he had ceased to be the centre of the gathering. He saw reproachful despair in the vicar's eye. He drifted slowly towards the window in the recess, and sat down on the little octagonal Moorish stool by the side of Mrs. Jehoram, and under the circumstances he appreciated at more than its proper value Mrs. Jehoram's kindly smile. He put down the violin in the window seat. 35. Mrs. Jehoram and the angel apart, Mr. Wilmerdings playing. "I have so longed for a quiet word with you," said Mrs. Jehoram in a low tone, "to tell you how delightful I found your playing." "I am glad it pleased you," said the angel. "Pleased is scarcely the word," said Mrs. Jehoram. "I was moved, profoundly. These others did not understand. I was glad you did not play with him." The angel looked at the mechanism called Wilmerdings, and felt glad too. The angelic conception of duets is a kind of conversation upon violins. But he said nothing. "I worship music," said Mrs. Jehoram. "I know nothing about it technically, but there is something in it, a longing, a wish." The angel stared at her face. She met his eyes. "You understand," she said. "I see you understand." He was certainly a very nice boy, sentimentally precocious perhaps, and with deliciously liquid eyes. There was an interval of Chopin, Op. 40, played with immense precision. Mrs. Jehoram had a sweet face still, in shadow, with the light falling round her golden hair, and a curious theory flashed across the angel's mind. The perceptible powder only supported his view of something infinitely bright and lovable, caught, tarnished, coarsened, coated over.
Do you, said the angel in a low tone, are you separated from your world? As you are, whispered Mrs. Jehoram. This is so cold, said the angel. So harsh. He meant the whole world. I feel it too, said Mrs. Jehoram, referring to Sida Morton home. There are those who cannot live without sympathy, she said, after a sympathetic pause. And times when one feels alone in the world, fighting a battle against it all, laughing, flirting, hiding the pain of it. And hoping, said the angel with a wonderful glance. Yes. Mrs. Jehoram, who was an epicure of flirtations, felt the angel was more than redeeming the promise of his appearance. Indisputably, he worshipped her. Do you look for sympathy? She said. Or have you found it? I think, said the angel, very softly, leaning forward. I think I have found it. Interval of Chopin Op. 40. The very eldest Miss Papava and Mrs. Pirbright whispering, Lady Hammergallow, glasses up, looking down the saloon with an unfriendly expression at the angel, Mrs. Jehoram and the angel exchanging deep and significant glances. Her name, said the angel. Mrs. Jehoram made a movement. Is Delia. She is... Delia? Said Mrs. Jehoram sharply, slowly realising a terrible misunderstanding. A fanciful name? Why? No, not that little housemaid at the vicarage. The polonaise terminated with a flourish. The angel was quite surprised at the change in Mrs. Jehoram's expression. I never did, said Mrs. Jehoram, recovering. To make me your confidant in an intrigue with a servant. Really, Mr. Angel, it's possible to be too original. Then, suddenly, their colloquy was interrupted. 36. This section is, so far as my memory goes, the shortest in the book. But the enormity of the offence necessitates the separation of this section from all other sections. The vicar, you must understand, had done his best to inculate the recognised differentiae of a gentleman. Never allow a lady to carry anything, said the vicar. Say, permit me, and relieve her. Always stand until every lady is seated. Always rise and open a door for a lady, and so forth. All men who have elder sisters know that code. And the angel, who had failed to relieve Lady Hammergallow of her teacup, danced forward with astonishing dexterity, leaving Mrs. Jehoram in the window seat, and with an elegant, permit me, rescued the tea-tray from Lady Hammergallow's pretty parlour-maid, and vanished officiously in front of her. The vicar rose to his feet with an inarticulate cry. 37. He's drunk, said Mr. Rathbone Slater, breaking a terrific silence. That's the matter with him. Mrs. Jehoram laughed hysterically. The vicar stood up, motionless, saying, "No, I forgot to explain servants to him," said the vicar to himself in a swift outbreak of remorse. "I thought he did understand servants." "Really, Mr. Hillier," said Lady Hammergallow, evidently exercising enormous self-control and speaking in panting spasms. "Really, Mr. Hillier, your genius is too terrible. I really must ask you to take him home." So, to the dialogue in the corridor of alarmed maidservant and well-meaning, but shockingly gauche, angel, appears the vicar. His botryoidal little face crimson, gaunt despair in his eyes, and his necktie under his left ear,
Come, he said, struggling with emotion. Come away. I am disgraced forever.
And the angel stared for a second at him and obeyed, meekly, perceiving himself in the presence of unknown but evidently terrible forces. And so began and ended the angel's social career. In the informal indignation meeting that followed, Lady Hammergallow took the informal chair.
I feel humiliated, she said. The vicar assured me he was an exquisite player. I never imagined.
He was drunk, said Mr. Rathbone Slater. You could tell it from the way he fumbled with his tea.
Such a fiasco, said Mrs. Murgle.
The vicar assured me, said Lady Hammergallow. The man I have staying with me is a musical genius, he said. His very words.
His ears must be burning anyhow, said Tommy Rathbone Slater. I was trying to keep him quiet, said Mrs. Jehoram, by humouring him. And do you know the things he said to me, there?
The thing he played, said Mr. Wilmerdings. I must confess I did not like to charge him to his face, but really, it was merely drifting. Just fooling with a fiddle, eh? Said George Haringey. Well, I thought it was beyond me. So much of your fine music is...
Oh, George, said the younger Miss Pirbright.
The vicar was a bit on too, to judge by his tie, said Mr. Rathbone Slater. It's a dashed rummy go.
Did you notice how he fussed after the genius? One has to be so very careful, said the very eldest Miss Papava. He told me he is in love with the vicar's housemaid, said Mrs. Jehoram. I almost laughed in his face. The vicar ought never to have brought him here, said Mrs. Rathbone Slater, with decision. The Trouble of the Barbed Wire. 38. So, ingloriously, ended the angel's first and last appearance in society. Vicar and angel returned to the vicarage, crestfallen black figures in the bright sunlight, going dejectedly. The angel deeply pained that the vicar was pained. The vicar, dishevelled and desperate, intercalating spasmodic remorse and apprehension with broken explanations of the theory of etiquette.
They do not understand, said the vicar, over and over again. They will all be so very much aggrieved. I do not know what to say to them. It is all so confused, so perplexing.
And at the gate of the vicarage, at the very spot where Delia had first seemed beautiful, stood Horrocks, the village constable, awaiting them. He held coiled up about his hand certain short lengths of barbed wire.
Good evening, Horrocks,
said the vicar, as the constable held the gate open.
Evening, sir,
said Horrocks, and added in a kind of mysterious undertone, Could I speak to you a minute, sir?
Certainly,
said the vicar. The angel walked on thoughtfully to the house, and meeting Delia in the hall, stopped her, and cross-examined her at length over differences between servants and ladies.
You'll excuse my taking the liberty, sir, said Horrocks, but there's trouble brewing for that crippled gent you got staying here. Bless me, said the vicar. You don't say so. Sir John Gotch, sir. He's very angry indeed, sir. His language, sir. But I felt bound to tell you, sir. He's certain set on taking out a summons on account of that there barbed wire. Certain set, sir, he is. Sir John Gotch, said the vicar. Wire? I don't understand. He asked me to find out who did it. Of course, I've had to do my duty, sir. Naturally, a disagreeable one. Barbed wire? Duty? I don't understand you, Horrocks. I'm afraid, sir, there's no denying the evidence. I've made careful inquiries, sir.
And forthwith, the constable began telling the vicar of a new and terrible outrage committed by the angelic visitor. But we need not follow that explanation in detail, or the subsequent confession. For my own part, I think there is nothing more tedious than dialogue. It gave the vicar a new view of the angelic character, a vignette of the angelic indignation. A shady lane, sun-mottled, sweet hedges full of honeysuckle and vetch on either side, and a little girl gathering flowers, forgetful of the barbed wire which, all along the Siderford Road, fenced in the dignity of Sir John Gotch from bounders and the detested million. Then, suddenly, a gashed hand, a bitter outcry, and the angel, sympathetic, comforting, inquisitive. Explanations, sob set, and then, altogether novel phenomenon in the angelic career. Passion. A furious onslaught upon the barbed wire of Sir John Gotch, barbed wire recklessly handled, slashed, bent and broken, yet the angel acted without personal malice, saw in the thing only an ugly and vicious plant that trailed insidiously among its fellows. Finally, the angel's explanations gave the vicar a picture of the angel alone amidst his destruction, trembling and amazed at the sudden force, not himself, that had sprung up within him, and set him striking and cutting. Amazed, too, at the crimson blood that trickled down his fingers. "It is still more horrible," said the angel, when the vicar explained the artificial nature of the thing. "If I had seen the man who put this silly, cruel stuff there to hurt little children, I know I should have tried to inflict pain upon him. I have never felt like this before. I am indeed becoming tainted and coloured altogether by the wickedness of this world. To think, too, that you men should be so foolish as to uphold the laws that let a man do such spiteful things. Yes, I know, you will say it has to be so, for some remoter reason. That is a thing that only makes me angrier. Why cannot an act rest on its own merits, as it does in the angelic land?" That was the incident, the history of which the vicar now gradually learnt, getting the bare outline from Horrocks, the colour and emotion subsequently from the angel. The thing had happened the day before the musical festival at Sidder Morton House.
"Have you told Sir John who did it?" asked the vicar. "And are you sure?"
"Quite sure, sir. There can be no doubting it was your gentleman, sir. I've not told Sir John yet, sir, but I shall have to tell Sir John this evening. Meaning no offence to you, sir, as I hopes you'll see. It's my duty, sir. Besides which—"
"Of course," said the vicar hastily. "Certainly it's your duty. And what will Sir John do?"
"He's dreadful set against the person who did it, destroying property like that, and sort of slapping his arrangements in the face."
Pause. Horrocks made a movement. The vicar, tie almost at the back of his neck now, a most unusual thing for him, stared blankly at his toes.
"I thought I'd tell you, sir," said Horrocks.
"Yes," said the vicar. "Thanks, Horrocks, thanks."
He scratched the back of his head.
"You might, perhaps. I think it's the best way. Quite sure Mr. Angel did it?"
"Sherlock Holmes, sir, couldn't be cocksurer."
"Then I'd better give you a little note to the squire."
39. The vicar's table talk at dinner that night, after the angel had stated his case, was full of grim explanations, prisons, madness.
"It's too late to tell the truth about you now," said the vicar. "Besides, that's impossible. I really do not know what to say. We must face our circumstances, I suppose. I am so undecided, so torn. It's the two worlds. If your angelic world were only a dream, or if this world were only a dream, Or if I could believe either or both dreams, it would be all right with me. But here is a real angel and a real summons. How to reconcile them I do not know. I must talk to Gotch, but he won't understand. Oh, nobody will understand.
I am putting you to terrible inconvenience, I am afraid. My appalling unworldliness.
It's not you, said the vicar. It's not you. I perceive you have brought something strange and beautiful into my life. It's not you. It's myself. If I had more faith either way, if I could believe entirely in this world and call you an abnormal phenomenon, as Crump does. But no. Terrestrial, angelic terrestrial. Seesaw. Still, Gotch is certain to be disagreeable. Most disagreeable. He always is. It puts me into his hands. He is a bad moral influence, I know. Drinking, gambling, worse. Still, one must render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And he is against disestablishment.
Then the vicar would revert to the social collapse of the afternoon.
You are so very fundamental, you know, he said,
several times. The angel went to his own room, puzzled, but very depressed. Every day the world had frowned darker upon him and his angelic ways. He could see how the trouble affected the vicar, yet he could not imagine how he could avert it. It was all so strange and unreasonable. Twice again, too, he had been pelted out of the village. He found the violin lying on his bed where he had laid it before dinner, and taking it up he began to play to comfort himself. But now he played no delicious vision of the angelic land. The iron of the world was entering into his soul. For a week now he had known pain and rejection, suspicion and hatred. A strange new spirit of revolt was growing up in his heart. He played a melody, still sweet and tender as those of the angelic land, but charged with a new note, the note of human sorrow and effort, now swelling into something like defiance, dying now into a plaintive sadness. He played softly, playing to himself to comfort himself, but the vicar heard, and all his finite bothers were swallowed up in a hazy melancholy, a melancholy that was quite remote from sorrow. And besides the vicar, the angel had another hearer, of whom neither angel nor vicar was thinking. Delia, 40. She was only 4 or 5 yards away from the angel in the westward gable. The diamond-paned window of her little white room was open. She knelt on her box of japanned tin and rested her chin on her hands, her elbows on the windowsill. The young moon hung over the pine trees, and its light, cool and colourless, lay softly upon the silent, sleeping world. Its light fell upon her white face, and discovered new depths in her dreaming eyes. Her soft lips fell apart, and showed the little white teeth. Delia was thinking, vaguely, wonderfully, as girls will think. It was feeling, rather than thinking. Clouds of beautiful, translucent emotion drove across the clear sky of her mind, taking shape that changed and vanished. She had all that wonderful emotional tenderness, that subtle, exquisite desire for self-sacrifice, which exists so inexplicably in a girl's heart. Exists, it seems, only to be presently trampled underfoot by the grim and gross humours of daily life, to be ploughed in again roughly and remorselessly, as the farmer ploughs in the clover that has sprung up in the soil. She had been looking out at the tranquillity of the moonlight, long before the angel began to play, waiting. Then, Suddenly the quiet, motionless beauty of silver and shadow was suffused with tender music. She did not move, but her lips closed and her eyes grew even softer. She had been thinking before of the strange glory that had suddenly flashed out about the stooping hunchback when he spoke to her in the sunset, of that and of a dozen other glances, chance turns, even once the touching of her hand. That afternoon he had spoken to her, asking strange questions. Now the music seemed to bring his very face before her, his look of half-curious solicitude peering into her face, into her eyes, into her, and through her, deep down into her soul. He seemed now to be speaking directly to her, telling her of his solitude and trouble. Oh, that regret, that longing, for he was in trouble. And how could a servant girl help him? This soft-spoken gentleman who carried himself so kindly, who played so sweetly. The music was so sweet and keen. It came so near to the thought of her heart that presently one hand tightened on the other, and the tears came streaming down her face. As Crump would tell you, people do not do that kind of thing unless there is something wrong with the nervous system. But then, from the scientific point of view, being in love is a pathological condition. I am painfully aware of the objectionable nature of my story here. I have even thought of wilfully perverting the truth to propitiate the lady reader, but I could not. The story has been too much for me. I do the thing with my eyes open. Delia must remain what she really was, a servant girl. I know that to give a mere servant girl, or at least an English servant girl, the refined feelings of a human being, to present her as speaking with anything but an intolerable confusion of aspirates, places me outside the pale of respectable writers. Association with servants, even in thought, is dangerous in these days. I can only plead, pleading vainly, I know, that Delia was a very exceptional servant girl. Possibly, if one inquired, it might be found that her parentage was upper middle class, that she was made of the finer upper middle class clay. And, this perhaps may avail me better, I will promise that in some future work I will redress the balance, and the patient reader shall have the recognised article, enormous feet and hands, systematic aspiration of vowels and elimination of aspirates. No figure. Only middle-class girls have figures. The thing is beyond a servant girl's means. A fringe, by agreement, and a cheerful readiness to dispose of her self-respect for half a crown. That is the accepted English servant, the typical English woman, when stripped of money and accomplishments, as she appears in the works of contemporary writers. But Delia, somehow, was different. I can only regret the circumstance. It was altogether beyond my control. Dr. Crump acts. 41. Early the next morning, the angel went down through the village, and, climbing the fence, waded through the waist-high reeds that fringe the Sidder. He was going to Bandram Bay to take a nearer view of the sea, which one could just see on a clear day from the higher parts of Siddermorton Park. And suddenly he came upon Crump, sitting on a log and smoking. Crump always smoked exactly 2 ounces per week, and he always smoked it in the open air.
"Hello,"
said Crump in his healthiest tone.
"How's the wing?"
Very well, said the angel. The pain's gone.
I suppose you know you are trespassing?
Trespassing, said the angel.
I suppose you don't know what that means, said Crump.
I don't, said the angel.
I must congratulate you. I don't know how long you will last, but you are keeping it up remarkably well. I thought at first you were a matoid, But you're so amazingly consistent. Your attitude of entire ignorance of the elementary facts of life is really a very amusing pose. You make slips, of course, but very few. But surely we two understand one another."
He smiled at the angel.
"You would beat Sherlock Holmes. I wonder who you really are."
The angel smiled back, with eyebrows raised and hands extended. "It's impossible for you to know who I am. Your eyes are blind, your ears deaf, your soul dark, to all that is wonderful about me. It's no good my telling that I fell into your world."
The doctor waved his pipe. "Not that, please. I don't want to pry if you have your reasons for keeping quiet. Only I would like you to think of Hilliard's mental health. He really believes the story."
The angel shrugged his dwindling wings.
"You did not know him before this affair. He's changed tremendously. He used to be neat and comfortable. For the last fortnight he's been hazy, with a faraway look in his eyes. He preached last Sunday without his cufflinks, and something wrong with his tie, and he took for his text, 'Eye hath not seen nor ear heard.' He really believes all this nonsense about the angel land. The man is verging on monomania."
"You will see things from your own standpoint," said the angel.
"Everyone must. At any rate, I think it jolly regrettable to see this poor old fellow hypnotized, as you certainly have hypnotized him. I don't know where you come from, nor who you are, but I warn you I'm not going to see the old boy made a fool of much longer."
"But he's not being made a fool of. He's simply beginning to dream of a world outside his knowledge."
"It won't do," said Crump. "I'm not one of the dupe class. You are either of two things: a lunatic at large, which I don't believe, or a knave. Nothing else is possible. I think I know a little of this world, whatever I do of yours. Very well. If you don't leave Hillier alone, I shall communicate with the police, and either clap you into a prison, if you go back on your story, or into a madhouse if you don't. It's stretching a point, but I swear I'd certify you insane tomorrow to get you out of the village. It's not only the vicar, as you know. I hope that's plain. Now, what have you to say?"
With an affectation of great calm, the doctor took out his penknife and began to dig the blade into his pipe bowl. His pipe had gone out during this last speech. For a moment, neither spoke. The angel looked about him with a face that grew pale. The doctor extracted a plug of tobacco from his pipe and flung it away, shut his penknife and put it in his waistcoat pocket. He had not meant to speak quite so emphatically, but speech always warmed him. "Prison," said the angel. "Madhouse. Let me see." Then he remembered the vicar's explanation. "Not that," he said. He approached Crump with eyes dilated and hands outstretched.
"I knew you would know what those things meant, at any rate. Sit down," said Crump, indicating the tree trunk beside him by a movement of the head. The angel, shivering, sat down on the tree trunk and stared at the doctor. Crump was getting out his pouch. "You are a strange man," said the angel. "Your beliefs are like a steel trap." "They are,"
said Crump, flattered. "But I tell you, I assure you the thing is so... I know nothing, or at least remember nothing of anything I knew of this world before I found myself in the darkness of night on the moorland above Sidderford."
"Where did you learn the language, then?"
"I don't know. Only, I tell you, but I haven't an atom of the sort of proof that would convince you."
"And you
Really, said Crump, suddenly coming round upon him and looking into his eyes. You really believe you were eternally in a kind of glorious heaven before then?
I do, said the angel.
Pshaw, said Crump, and lit his pipe.
He sat, smoking, elbow on knee, for some time, and the angel sat and watched him. Then his face grew less troubled.
It is just possible, he said to himself,
rather than to the angel, and began another piece of silence.
You see, he said, when that was finished, there is such a thing as double personality. A man sometimes forgets who he is and thinks he is someone else, leaves home, friends, and everything, and leads a double life. There was a case in Nature only a month or so ago. The man was sometimes English and right-handed, and sometimes Welsh and left-handed. When he was English, he knew no Welsh. When he was Welsh, he knew no English.
He turned suddenly on the angel and said,
Home.
He fancied he might revive in the angel some latent memory of his lost youth. He went on.
Dada. Papa. Daddy. Mammy. Pappy. Father. Dad. Governor. Old boy. Mother. Dear mother. Ma. Mumsy. No good? What are you laughing at?
Nothing, said the angel. You surprised me a little, that is all. A week ago I should have been puzzled by that vocabulary. For a minute, Crump rebuked the angel silently out of the corner of his eye.
You have such an ingenious face. You almost force me to believe you. You are certainly not an ordinary lunatic. Your mind, except for your isolation from the past, seems balanced enough. I wish Nordau or Lombroso or some of these Salpetrier men could have a look at you. Down here one gets no practice worth speaking about in mental cases. There's one idiot. He's just a damned idiot of an idiot. All the rest are thoroughly sane people.
Possibly that accounts for their behaviour, said the angel, thoughtfully.
But to consider your general position here, said Crump, ignoring his comment. I really regard you as a bad influence here. These fancies are contagious. It is not simply the vicar. There is a man named Shine, has caught the fad, and he has been in the drink for a week, off and on, and offering to fight anyone who says you are not an angel. Then a man over at Sidderford is, I hear, affected with a kind of religious mania on the same tack. These things spread. There ought to be a quarantine in mischievous ideas. And I've heard another story.
But what can I do? Said the angel. Suppose I am, quite unintentionally, doing mischief.
You can leave the village, said Crump.
Then I shall only go into another village.
That's not my affair, said Crump. Go where you like. Only go. Leave these 3 people. The vicar, Shine, the little servant girl, whose heads are all spinning with galaxies of angels.
But, said the angel, face your world. I tell you, I can't. And leave Delia? I don't understand. I do not know how to set about getting work and food and shelter, and I'm growing afraid of human beings.
Fancies, said Crump, watching him. Mania. It's no good my persisting in worrying you, he said suddenly. But certainly the situation is impossible as it stands. He stood up with a jerk. Good morning, Mr. Angel, he said. The long and the short of it is, I say it as a medical adviser of this parish. You are an unhealthy influence. We can't have you.
You must go.
He turned and went striding through the grass towards the roadway, leaving the angel sitting disconsolately on the tree trunk. An unhealthy influence, said the angel slowly, staring blankly in front of him, and trying to realize what it meant. Sir John Gotch, Acts 42. Sir John Gotch was a little man with scrubby hair, a small, thin nose sticking out of a face crackled with wrinkles, tight brown gaiters, and a riding whip. "I've come, you see," he said, as Mrs. Hinniger closed the door. "Thank you," said the vicar. "I'm obliged to you. I'm really obliged to you. Glad to be of any service to you," said Sir John Gotch. Angular attitude. "This business," said the vicar, "this unfortunate business of the barbed wire is really, you know, the most unfortunate business." Sir John Gotch became decidedly more angular in his attitude. "It is," he said. "This Mr. Angel being my guest, no reason why he should cut my wire," said Sir John Gotch, briefly. "None whatever." "May I ask who this Mr. Angel is?" asked Sir John Gotch, with the abruptness of long premeditation. The vicar's fingers jumped to his chin. What was the good of talking to a man like Sir John Gotch about angels? "To tell you the exact truth," said the vicar, "there is a little secret. Lady Hammergallow told me as much." The vicar's face suddenly became bright red. "Do you know," said Sir John, with scarcely a pause, "he's been going about this village preaching socialism?" "Good heavens," said the vicar. "No." "He has. He has been buttonholing every yokel he came across and asking them why they had to work, while I and you know, did nothing. He has been saying we ought to educate every man up to your level, and mine, out of the rates, I suppose, as usual. He has been suggesting that I and you know, keep these people down. Pith 'em." "Dear me," said the vicar. "I had no idea." "He has done this wire-cutting as a demonstration, I tell you, as a socialistic demonstration. If we don't come down on him pretty sharply, I tell you, we shall have the palings down in Flinders Lane next, and the next thing will be ricks afire, and every damned— I beg your pardon, vicar, I know I'm too fond of that word— every blessed pheasant's egg in the parish smashed. I know these." "Socialist," said the vicar, quite put out. "I had no idea." "You see why I am inclined to push matters against our gentleman, though he is your guest. It seems to me he has been taking advantage of your paternal— "Oh, not paternal," said the vicar. "Really." "I beg your pardon, vicar, it was a slip." "Of your kindness, to go mischief-making everywhere, setting class against class, and the poor man against his bread and butter." The vicar's fingers were at his chin again. "So, there's one of two things," said Sir John Gotch. "Either that guest of yours leaves the parish, or I take proceedings. That's final." The vicar's mouth was all askew. "That's the position," said Sir John, jumping to his feet. "If it were not for you, I should take proceedings at once. As it is, am I to take proceedings or no?" "You see," said the vicar, in horrible perplexity. "Well?" "Arrangements have to be made. He's a mischief-making idler. I know the breed. But I'll give you a week." "Thank you," said the vicar. "I understand your position. I perceive the situation is getting intolerable." "Sorry to give you this bother, of course," said Sir John. "A week,"
said the vicar. "A week," said Sir John, leaving. The vicar returned, after accompanying Gotch out, and for a long time he remained sitting before the desk in his study, plunged in thought. "A week," he said, after an immense silence. "Here is an angel, a glorious angel, who has quickened my soul to beauty and to light, who has opened my eyes to Wonderland and something more than Wonderland, and I have promised to get rid of him in a week. What are we men made of? How can I tell him?" He began to walk up and down the room. Then he went into the dining room and stood staring blankly out at the cornfield. The table was already laid for lunch. Presently he turned, still dreaming, and almost mechanically helped himself to a glass of sherry. The Sea Cliff. 43. The angel lay upon the summit of the cliff above Bandram Bay, and stared out at the glittering sea. Sheer from under his elbows fell the cliff, 507 feet of it down to the datum line, and the seabirds eddied and soared below him. The upper part of the cliff was a greenish, chalky rock, the lower two-thirds a warm red, marbled with gypsum bands, and from half a dozen places spurted jets of water to fall in long cascades down its face. The swell frothed white on the flinty beach, and the water beyond, where the shadows of an outstanding rock lay, was green and purple in 1,000 tints, and marked with streaks and flakes of foam. The air was full of sunlight, and the tinkling of the little waterfalls and the slow soughing of the seas below. Now and then, a butterfly flickered over the face of the cliff, and a multitude of seabirds perched and flew hither and thither. The angel lay with his crippled, shriveled wings humped upon his back, watching the gulls and jackdaws and rooks circling in the sunlight, soaring, eddying, sweeping down to the water, or upward into the dazzling blue of the sky. Long the angel lay there, and watched them going to and fro on outspread wings. He watched, and as he watched them he remembered with infinite longing the rivers of starlight and the sweetness of the land from which he came. And a gull came gliding overhead, swiftly and easily, with its broad wings spreading white and fair against the blue. And suddenly a shadow came into the angel's eyes. The sunlight left them. He thought of his own crippled pinions, and put his face upon his arm, and wept. A woman who was walking along the footpath across the cliff field saw only a twisted hunchback dressed in the vicar of Sidder Morton's cast-off clothes, sprawling foolishly at the edge of the cliff, and with his forehead on his arm. She looked at him, and looked again. "The silly creature has gone to sleep," she said, and though she had a heavy basket to carry, came towards him with an idea of waking him up. But as she drew near, she saw his shoulders heave and heard the sound of his sobbing. She stood still a minute, and her features twitched into a kind of grin. Then, treading softly, she turned and went back towards the pathway. "'Tis so hard to think of anything to say," she said. "Poor afflicted soul." Presently the angel ceased sobbing, and stared with a tear-stained face at the beach below him. "This world," he said, "wraps me round and swallows me up. My wings grow shrivelled and useless. Soon I shall be nothing more than a crippled man, and I shall age and bow myself to pain and die. I am miserable, and I am alone." Then he rested his chin on his hands upon the edge of the cliff, and began to think of Delia's face with the light in her eyes. The angel felt a curious desire to go to her and tell her of his withered wings.
to place his arms about her and weep for the land he had lost. "Delia," he said to himself, very softly. Then presently, a cloud drove in front of the sun. Mrs. Hinniger acts 44. Mrs. Hinniger surprised the vicar by tapping at his study door after tea. "Begging your pardon, sir," said Mrs. Hinniger, "but might I make so bold as to speak to you for a moment?"
"Certainly, Mrs. Hinniger," said the vicar, little dreaming of the blow that was coming. He held a letter in his hand, a very strange and disagreeable letter from his bishop, a letter that irritated and distressed him, criticising in the strongest language the guests he chose to entertain in his own house. Only a popular bishop, living in a democratic age, a bishop who was still half a pedagogue, could have written such a letter. Mrs. Hinniger coughed behind her hand and struggled with some respiratory disorganisation. The vicar felt apprehensive. Usually, in their interviews, he was the most disconcerted, invariably so when the interview ended. "Well," he said, "may I make so bold, sir, as to ask when Mr. Angel is a-going?" Cough. The vicar started. "To ask when Mr. Angel is going?" he repeated slowly, to gain time. "Another? I'm sorry, sir, but I've been used to waiting on gentlefolks, sir, and you'd hardly imagine how it feels quite to wait on such as him." "Such as him? Do I understand you, Mrs. Hinniger, that you don't like Mr. Angel?" "You see, sir, before I came to you, sir, I was at Lord Dundler's 17 years, and you, sir, if you will excuse me, are a perfect gentleman yourself, sir, though in the church, and then—" "Dear, dear," said the vicar, "and don't you regard Mr. Angel as a gentleman?" "I'm sorry to have to say it, sir." "But what? Dear me, surely—" "I'm sorry to have to say it, sir, but when a party goes turning vegetarian suddenly and putting out all the cooking and hasn't no proper luggage of his own and borries shirts and socks from his host and don't know no better than to try his knife at peas, as I seed my very self, and goes talking in odd corners to the housemaids, and folds up his napkin after meals, and eats with his fingers at minced veal, and plays the fiddle in the middle of the night, keeping everybody awake, and stares and grins at his elders a getting upstairs, and generally misconducts himself with things that I can scarcely tell you all. One can't help thinking, sir. Thought is free, sir, and one can't help coming to one's own conclusions. Besides which, there is talk all over the village about him, what with one thing and another. I know a gentleman when I sees a gentleman, and I know a gentleman when I don't see a gentleman, and me and Susan and George, we've talked it over, being the upper servants, so to speak, and experienced, and leaving out that girl Delia, who I only hope won't come to any harm through him, and depend upon it, sir, that Mr. Angel ain't what you think he is, sir, and the sooner he leaves this house, the better." Mrs. Hinniger ceased abruptly, and stood, panting but stern, and with her eyes grimly fixed on the vicar's face. "Really, Mrs. Hinniger," said the vicar, and then, "Oh, Lord!" "What have I done?" said the vicar, suddenly starting up and appealing to the inexorable fates. "What have I done?" "There's no knowing," said Mrs. Hinniger, "though a deal of talk in the village." "Bother," said the vicar, going and staring out of the window. Then he turned. "Look here, Mrs. Hinniger, Mr. Angel will be leaving this house in the course of a week. Is that enough?"
"Quite," said Mrs. Hinniger.
"And I feel sure, sir—"
The vicar's eyes fell with unwanted eloquence upon the door. The Angel in Trouble. 45.
"The fact is," said the vicar, "this is no world for angels."
The blinds had not been drawn, and the twilight outer world under an overcast sky seemed unspeakably grey and cold. The angel sat at table in dejected silence. His inevitable departure had been proclaimed. Since his presence hurt people and made the vicar wretched, he acquiesced in the justice of the decision. But what would happen to him after his plunge, he could not imagine. Something very disagreeable, certainly.
"There is the violin," said the vicar. "Only after our experience, I must get you clothes, a general outfit. Oh, dear me, you don't understand railway travelling, and coinage, taking lodgings, eating houses. I must come up at least and see you settled, get work for you. But an angel in London, working for his living, that grey, cold wilderness of people, what will become of you? If I had one friend in the world I could trust to believe me, I ought not to be sending you away."
"Do not trouble overmuch for me, my friend," said the angel. "At least this life of yours ends, and there are things in it. There is something in this life of yours. Your care for me. I thought there was nothing beautiful at all in life."
"And I have betrayed you,"
said the vicar, with a sudden wave of remorse.
"Why did I not face them all, say, 'This is the best of life'? What do these everyday things matter?"
He stopped, suddenly.
"What do they matter?" he said.
"I have only come into your life to trouble it," said the angel.
"Don't say that," said the vicar. "You have come into my life to awaken me. I have been dreaming this was necessary and that, dreaming that this narrow prison was the world, and the dream still hangs about me and troubles me. That is all. Even your departure. Am I not dreaming that you must go?"
When he was in bed that night, the mystical aspect of the case came still more forcibly before the vicar. He lay awake and had the most horrible visions of his sweet and delicate visitor drifting through this unsympathetic world and happening upon the cruelest misadventures. His guest was an angel, assuredly. He tried to go over the whole story of the past 8 days again. He thought of the hot afternoon, the shot fired out of sheer surprise, the fluttering, iridescent wings, the beautiful saffron-robed figure upon the ground. How wonderful that had seemed to him. And then his mind turned to the things he had heard of the other world, to the dreams the violin had conjured up, to the vague, fluctuating, wonderful cities of the angelic land. He tried to recall the forms of the buildings, the shapes of the fruits upon the trees, the aspect of the winged shapes that traversed its ways. They grew from a memory into a present reality, grew every moment just a little more vivid, and his troubles a little less immediate. And so, softly and quietly, the vicar slipped out of his troubles and perplexities into the land of dreams. 46. Delia sat with her window open, hoping to hear the angel play, but that night there was to be no playing. The sky was overcast, yet not so thickly but that the moon was visible. High up, a broken cloud lace drove across the sky, and now the moon was a hazy patch of light, and now it was darkened, and now rode clear and bright and sharply outlined against the blue gulf of night. And presently she heard the door into the garden opening, and a figure came out under the drifting pallor of the moonlight. It was the angel, but he wore once more the saffron robe in the place of his formless overcoat. In the uncertain light, this garment had only a colourless shimmer, and his wings behind him seemed a leaden grey. He began taking short runs, flapping his wings and leaping, going to and fro amidst the drifting patches of light and the shadows of the trees. Delia watched him in amazement. He gave a despondent cry, leaping higher. His shriveled wings flashed and fell. A thicker patch in the cloud film made everything obscure. He seemed to spring 5 or 6 feet from the ground and fall clumsily. She saw him in the dimness crouching on the ground, and then she heard him sobbing. "He's hurt," said Delia, pressing her lips together hard and staring. "I ought to help him." She hesitated, then stood up and flitted swiftly towards the door, went slipping quietly downstairs and out into the moonlight. The angel still lay upon the lawn and sobbed for utter wretchedness. "Oh, what is the matter?" said Delia, stooping over him and touching his head timidly. The angel ceased sobbing, sat up abruptly, and stared at her. He saw her face, moonlit and soft with pity. "What is the matter?" she whispered. "Are you hurt?" The angel stared about him, and his eyes came to rest on her face. "Delia," he whispered. "Are you hurt?" said Delia. "My wings," said the angel. "I cannot use my wings." Delia did not understand, but she realized that it was something very dreadful. "It is dark. It is cold," whispered the angel. "I cannot use my wings." It hurt her unaccountably to see the tears on his face. She did not know what to do. "Pity me, Delia," said the angel, suddenly extending his arms towards her. "Pity me." Impulsively she knelt down and took his face between her hands. "I do not know," she said, "but I am sorry. I am sorry for you, with all my heart." The angel said not a word. He was looking at her little face in the bright moonlight, with an expression of uncomprehending wonder in his eyes. "This strange world," he said. She suddenly withdrew her hands. The cloud drove over the moon. "What can I do to help you?" she whispered. "I would do anything to help you." He still held her at arm's length, perplexity replacing misery in his face. "This strange world," he repeated. Both whispered, she kneeling, he sitting, in the fluctuating moonlight and darkness of the lawn. "Delia," said Mrs. Hinniger, suddenly projecting from her window. "Delia, is that you?" They both looked up at her in consternation. "Come in at once, Delia," said Mrs. Hinniger. "If that Mr. Angel was a gentleman, which he isn't, he'd feel ashamed of himself. And you, an orphan too." The last day of the visit. 47. On the morning of the next day, the angel, after he had breakfasted, went out towards the moor, and Mrs. Hinniger had an interview with the vicar. What happened need not concern us now. The vicar was visibly disconcerted. "He must go," he said. "Certainly, he must go." And straight away he forgot the particular accusation in the general trouble. He spent the morning in hazy meditation, interspersed by a spasmodic study of Skiff and Waterlow's price list, and the catalogue of the medical, scholastic, and clerical stores. A schedule grew slowly on a sheet of paper that lay on the desk before him. He cut out a self-measurement form from the tailoring department of the stores and pinned it to the study curtains. This was the kind of document he was making. 1 black Melton frock coat. Pats, £3, 10 shillings. Trousers? 2 pairs or 1. 1 Cheviot tweed suit. Right for patterns. Self-measure? The vicar spent some time studying a pleasing array of model gentlemen. They were all very nice-looking, but he found it hard to imagine the angel so transfigured. For, although 6 days had passed, the angel remained without any suit of his own. The vicar had vacillated between a project of driving the angel into Port Broddock and getting him measured for a suit, and his absolute horror of the insinuating manners of the tailor he employed. He knew that tailor would demand an exhaustive explanation. Besides which, one never knew when the angel might leave. So the 6 days had passed, and the angel had grown steadily in the wisdom of this world, and shrouded his brightness still in the ample retirement of the vicar's newest clothes. 1 soft felt hat, numbered G7, say, 8 shillings, 6 pence. 1 silk hat, 14 shillings, 6 pence. Hat box?
I suppose he ought to have a silk hat, said the vicar. It's the correct thing up there. Shape number 3 seems best suited to his style, but it's dreadful to think of him all alone in that great city. Everyone will misunderstand him, and he will misunderstand everybody. However, I suppose it must be. Where was I?
1 toothbrush, 1 brush and comb. Razor? 6 shirts. Measure his neck? 6 shillings each. Socks. Pants? 2 suits, pyjamas. Price? Say 15 shillings. 1 dozen collars. The Life Guardsman. 8 shillings. Braces, oxen patent, versatile. 1 shilling, 11.5 pence.
But how will he get them on? Said the vicar.
1 rubber stamp, T Angel, and marking ink in box complete. 9 pence.
Those washerwomen are certain to steal all his things.
1 single-bladed penknife with corkscrew, say 1 shilling, 6 pence.
Note, don't forget cufflinks, collar stud and co.
The vicar loved and co. It gave things such a precise and business-like air. 1 leather portmanteau.
Had better see these.
And so forth, meanderingly. It kept the vicar busy until lunchtime, though his heart ached. The angel did not return to lunch. This was not so very remarkable. Once before he had missed the midday meal. Yet, considering how short was the time they would have together now, he might perhaps have come back. Doubtless he had excellent reasons, though, for his absence. The vicar made an indifferent lunch. In the afternoon he rested in his usual manner, and did a little more to the list of requirements. He did not begin to feel nervous about the angel till tea time. He waited perhaps half an hour before he took tea.
Odd,
said the vicar, feeling still more lonely as he drank his tea. As the time for dinner crept on and no angel appeared, the vicar's imagination began to trouble him.
He will come in to dinner, surely, said the vicar,
caressing his chin, and beginning to fret about the house upon inconsiderable errands, as his habit was when anything occurred to break his routine. The sun set, a gorgeous spectacle, amidst tumbled masses of purple cloud. The gold and red faded into twilight. The evening star gathered her robe of light together from out the brightness of the sky in the west. Breaking the silence of evening that crept over the outer world, a corncrake began his whirring chant. The vicar's face grew troubled. Twice he went and stared at the darkening hillside, and then fretted back to the house again, Mrs. Hinniger served dinner.
"Your dinner's ready,"
she announced for the second time, with a reproachful intonation.
Yes, yes,
said the vicar, fussing off upstairs. He came down and went into his study and lit his reading lamp, a patent affair with an incandescent wick, dropping the match into his waste paper basket without stopping to see if it was extinguished. Then he fretted into the dining room and began a desultory attack on the cooling dinner. Dear reader, the time is almost ripe to say farewell to this little vicar of ours. 48. Sir John Gotch, still smarting over the business of the barbed wire, was riding along one of the grassy ways through the preserves by the Sidder, when he saw, strolling slowly through the trees beyond the undergrowth, the one particular human being he did not want to see.
"I'm damned,"
said Sir John Gotch with immense emphasis,
"if this isn't altogether too much."
He raised himself in the stirrups.
"Hi!" he shouted. "You there!"
The angel turned, smiling.
"Get out of this wood,"
said Sir John Gotch. "Why?" said the angel.
"I'm—"
said Sir John Gotch, meditating some cataclysmal expletive. But he could think of nothing more than
"Damned! Get out of this wood," he said.
The angel's smile vanished. "Why should I get out of this wood?" he said, and stood still. Neither spoke for a full half-minute, perhaps, and then Sir John Gotch dropped out of his saddle and stood by the horse. Now, you must remember, lest the angelic hosts be discredited hereby, that this angel had been breathing the poisonous air of this struggle for existence of ours for more than a week. It was not only his wings and the brightness of his face that suffered. He had eaten and slept and learnt the lesson of pain, had travelled so far on the road to humanity. All the length of his visit he had been meeting more and more of the harshness and conflict of this world, and losing touch with the glorious attitudes of his own.
"You won't go, eh?"
said Gotch, and began to lead his horse through the bushes towards the angel. The angel stood, all his muscles tight and his nerves quivering, watching his antagonist approach.
"Get out of this wood,"
said Gotch, stopping 3 yards away, his face white with rage, his bridle in one hand and his riding whip in the other. Strange floods of emotion were running through the angel. "Who are you?" he said, in a low, quivering voice. "Who am I, that you should order me out of this place? What has the world done that men like you—"
"You're the fool who cut my barbed wire," said Gotch, threatening. "If you want to know."
"Your barbed wire?" said the angel. "Was that your barbed wire? Are you the man who put down that barbed wire? What right have you—"
"Don't you go talking socialist rot," said Gotch in short gasps. "This wood's mine, and I've a right to protect it how I can. I know you're kind of muck, talking rot and stirring up discontent, and if you don't get out of it jolly sharp—"
"Well," said the angel, a brimming reservoir of unaccountable energy.
"Get out of this damned wood," said Gotch,
flashing into the bully out of sheer alarm at the light in the angel's face. He made one step towards him, with the whip raised. And then something happened that neither he nor the angel properly understood. The angel seemed to leap into the air. A pair of grey wings flashed out at the squire. He saw a face bearing down upon him, full of the wild beauty of passionate anger. His riding whip was torn out of his hand. His horse reared behind him, pulled him over, gained his bridle, and fled. The whip cut across his face as he fell back, stung across his face again as he sat on the ground. He saw the angel, radiant with anger, in the act to strike again. Gotch flung up his hands, pitched himself forward to save his eyes, and rolled on the ground under the pitiless fury of the blows that rained down upon him. "You brute!" cried the angel, striking wherever he saw flesh to feel. "You bestial thing of pride and lies! You who have overshadowed the souls of other men! You shallow fool with your horses and dogs! To lift your face against any living thing! Learn! Learn! Learn!" Gotch began screaming for help. Twice he tried to clamber to his feet, got to his knees, and went headlong again under the ferocious anger of the angel. Presently he made a strange noise in his throat, and ceased even to writhe under his punishment. Then, suddenly, the angel awakened from his wrath, and found himself standing, panting and trembling, one foot on a motionless figure, under the green stillness of the sunlit woods. He stared about him, then down at his feet where, among the tangled dead leaves, the hair was matted with blood. The whip dropped from his hands. The hot colour fled from his face. "Pain," he said. "Why does he lie so still?" He took his foot off Gotch's shoulder, bent down towards the prostrate figure, stood, listening, knelt, shook him. "Awake," said the angel. Then, still more softly, "Awake." He remained listening some minutes or more, stood up sharply, and looked round him at the silent trees. A feeling of profound horror descended upon him, wrapped him round about. With an abrupt gesture, he turned. "What has happened to me?" he said, in an awe-stricken whisper. He started back from the motionless figure. "Dead," he said suddenly, and turning, panic-stricken, fled headlong through the wood. 49. It was some minutes after the footsteps of the angel had died away in the distance that Gotch raised himself on his hand. "By Jove," he said. "Crump's right. Cut at the head, too." He put his hand to his face and felt the two wheals running across it, hot and fat. "I'll think twice before I lift my hand against a lunatic again," said Sir John Gotch. "He may be a person of weak intellect, but I'm damned if he hasn't a pretty strong arm. Phew! He's cut a bit clean off the top of my ear with that infernal lash. That infernal horse will go galloping to the house in the approved dramatic style. Little madam'll be scared out of her wits, and I shall have to explain how it all happened, while she vivisects me with questions. I'm a jolly good mind to have spring guns and man-traps put in this preserve. Confound the law." 50. But the angel, thinking that Gotch was dead, went wandering off in a passion of remorse and fear through the brakes and copses along the Sidder. You can scarcely imagine how appalled he was at this last and overwhelming proof of his encroaching humanity. All the darkness, passion, and pain of life seemed closing in upon him, inexorably becoming part of him, chaining him to all that a week ago he had found strange and pitiful in men. "Truly, this is no world for an angel," said the angel. "It is a world of war, a world of pain, a world of death. Anger comes upon one. I, who knew not pain and anger, stand here with bloodstains on my hands. I have fallen. To come into this world, is to fall. One must hunger and thirst and be tormented with 1,000 desires. One must fight for foothold, be angry, and strike. He lifted up his hands to heaven, the ultimate bitterness of helpless remorse in his face, and then flung them down with a gesture of despair. The prison walls of this narrow, passionate life seemed creeping in upon him, certainly and steadily, to crush him presently altogether. He felt what all we poor mortals have to feel sooner or later, the pitiless force of the things that must be, not only without us, but, where the real trouble lies, within. All the inevitable tormenting of one's high resolves, those inevitable seasons when the better self is forgotten. But with us, it is a gentle descent, made by imperceptible degrees over a long space of years. With him, it was the horrible discovery of one short week. He felt he was being crippled, caked over, blinded, stupefied in the wrappings of this life. He felt as a man might feel who has taken some horrible poison and feels destruction spreading within him. He took no account of hunger or fatigue or the flight of time. On and on he went, avoiding houses and roads, turning away from the sight and sound of a human being in a wordless, desperate argument with fate. His thoughts did not flow, but stood banked back in inarticulate remonstrance against his degradation. Chance directed his footsteps homeward, and, at last, after nightfall, he found himself faint and weary and wretched, stumbling along over the moor at the back of Sidder Morton. He heard the rats run and squeal in the heather, and once a noiseless big bird came out of the darkness, passed and vanished again, and he saw without noticing it a dull red glow in the sky before him. 51. But when he came over the brow of the moor, a vivid light sprang up before him and refused to be ignored. He came on down the hill and speedily saw more distinctly what the glare was. It came from darting and trembling tongues of fire, golden and red, that shot from the windows and a hole in the roof of the vicarage. A cluster of black heads, all the village, in fact, except the fire brigade, who were down at Aylmer's cottage trying to find the key of a machine house, came out in silhouette against the blaze. There was a roaring sound and a humming of voices, and presently a furious outcry. There was a shouting of, "No! No! Come back!" and an inarticulate roar. He began to run towards the burning house. He stumbled and almost fell, but he ran on. He found black figures running about him. The flaring fire blew gustily this way and that, and he smelt the smell of burning. "She went in," said one voice. "She went in." "The mad girl," said another. "Stand back! Stand back!" cried others. He found himself thrusting through an excited, swaying crowd and staring at the flames, and with the red reflection in their eyes. "Stand back," said a labourer, clutching him. "What is it?" said the angel. "What does this mean?" "There's a girl in the house, and she can't get out." "Went in after a fiddle," said another. "'Tis hopeless," he heard someone else say. "I was standing near her. I heard her," says she. "I can get his fiddle." I heard her, just like that. "I can get his fiddle." For a moment, the angel stood, staring. Then, in a flash, he saw it all, saw this grim little world of battle and cruelty, transfigured in a splendour that outshone the angelic land, suffused suddenly and insupportably glorious with the wonderful light of love and self-sacrifice. He gave a strange cry, and before anyone could stop him, was running towards the burning building. There were cries of, "The hunchback! The foreigner!" The vicar, whose scalded hand was being tied up, turned his head, and he and Crump saw the angel, a black outline against the intense red glare of the doorway. It was the sensation of the 10th of a second, yet both men could not have remembered that transitory attitude more vividly had it been a picture they had studied for hours together. Then the angel was hidden by something massive, and no one knew what, that fell, incandescent, across the doorway. 52. There was a cry of, "Delia!" and no more. But suddenly the flames spurted out in a blinding glare that shot upward to an immense height, a blinding brilliance broken by 1,000 flickering gleams like the waving of swords. And a gust of sparks, flashing in 1,000 colours, whirled up and vanished. Just then, and for a moment by some strange accident, a rush of music, like the swell of an organ, wove into the roaring of the flames. The whole village, standing in black knots, heard the sound, except Gaffer Siddons, who was deaf. Strange and beautiful it was. And then gone again. Lumpy Durgan, the idiot boy from Sidderford, said it began and ended like the opening and shutting of a door. But little Hetty Penzance had a pretty fancy of 2 figures with wings that flashed up and vanished among the flames. And after that it was she began to pine for the things she saw in her dreams, and was abstracted and strange. It grieved her mother sorely at the time. She grew fragile, as though she was fading out of the world, and her eyes had a strange, far-away look. She talked of angels, and rainbow colours and golden wings, and was forever singing an unmeaning fragment of an air that nobody knew, until Crump took her in hand and cured her with fattening dietary, syrup of hippophosphites, and cod liver oil. The Epilogue. And there, the story of the wonderful visit ends. The epilogue is in the mouth of Mrs. Mendham. There stand 2 little white crosses in the Siddermorton churchyard, near together, where the brambles come clambering over the stone wall. One is inscribed Thomas Angel, and the other Delia Hardy, and the dates of the deaths are the same. Really, there is nothing beneath them but the ashes of the vicar's stuffed ostrich. You will remember the vicar had his ornithological side. I noticed them when Mrs. Mendham was showing me the new Delabesh monument. Mendham has been vicar since Hillier died. "The granite came from somewhere in Scotland," said Mrs. Mendham, "and cost ever so much. I forget how much, but a wonderful lot. It's quite the talk of the village." "Mother," said Cissy Mendham, "you are stepping on a grave." "Dear me," said Mrs. Mendham. "How heedless of me. And the cripple's grave, too. But really, you've no idea how much this monument cost them." "These 2 people, by the by," said Mrs. Mendham, "were killed when the old vicarage was burnt. It's rather a strange story. He was a curious person, a hunchbacked fiddler, who came from nobody knows where, and imposed upon the late vicar to a frightful extent. He played in a pretentious way by ear, and we found out afterwards that he did not know a note of music, not a note. He was exposed before quite a lot of people. Among other things, he seems to have been carrying on, as people say, with one of the servants, a sly little drab. But Mendham had better tell you all about it. The man was half-witted and curiously deformed. It's strange the fancies girls have." She looked sharply at Cissy, and Cissy blushed to the eyes. "She was left in the house, and he rushed into the flames in an attempt to save her. Quite romantic, isn't it? He was rather clever with the fiddle, in his uneducated way. All the poor vicar's stuffed skins were burned at the same time. It was almost all he cared for. He never really got over the blow. He came to stop with us, for there wasn't another house available in the village, but he never seemed happy. He seemed all shaken. I never saw a man so changed. I tried to stir him up, but it was no good at all. He had the queerest delusions about angels and that kind of thing. It made him odd company at times. He would say he heard music and stare quite stupidly at nothing for hours together. He got quite careless about his dress. He died within a 12-month of the fire.
The End. You have been listening to The Wonderful Visit by H.G. Wells. Read by Stuart Crank.